Hello, my name is Darryl Robert Schoon. This is January 2020, and I think this is going to be a very significant year. And I'm saying that in the knowledge that I'm not quite sure how it's going to turn out. To give you some background on this talk, for those who don't know, in March 2007, I presented a 148-page paper before the Positive Deviant Network, a closed network of high-achieving, out-of-the-box thinkers. And in that paper, I predicted that the United States and world economy were headed for a very severe financial collapse and catastrophe and crisis. Well, that was in March 2007, and it was not well received at the group. They were the Positive Deviant Network, even though there were many out-of-the-box thinkers. They're all out-of-the-box thinkers, very unusual people. Many of them were very, very wealthy. And the fact that I said we're headed towards a catastrophe, that most of them did not see it coming at the time, did not meet with a positive response. And I can understand it. Fortunes were going to be lost. The next year, in 2008, there was another meeting of the Positive Deviant Network. This time it was in October. We met 4 times a year. And the special person at the event was my friend, Professor Antal Fekete. Marshall, my friend from law school, who put together the Positive Deviant Network, flew Dr. Fekete in to address the group at an event that was titled Bucky's World Game. Marshall was a very close friend of Buckminster Fuller's, and he had us play the world's game at this event in October 2008. What was interesting about it is a year and a half before, in March at the PDN, Positive Deviant Network, I had predicted an economic collapse was about to happen. This was a year and a half later, in October 2008. It was in the middle of the greatest economic crisis since the Great Depression. And so it was in this setting that Professor Fekete came in and basically gave his views on why this was happening. That the taking away of gold, which was the cotter pin of the international monetary system, had destabilized the bankers' economy of credit and debt. Things were fluctuating, and it was only going to get worse. Now, what was very, very important to me is what happened at that meeting, because I didn't expect it. I knew about Bucky Fuller from my friend Marshall. He was close friends of this genius, basically, for the last 40 years, at the end of his life. And Marshall had really, really taken to Bucky's philosophy and theories. Prior to the 2008 meeting of the Positive Deviant Network, I had sort of dismissed Bucky as a well-meaning, perhaps genius, perhaps a futurist, but he certainly didn't see the world from the way I saw it, and what he saw wasn't certainly what I saw. What was going to change was what Marshall required us to do at that meeting in 2008 in the middle of the financial crisis. He divided the group into groups of 10, and he assigned each one of us 120 pages to read from Bucky Fuller's book, Critical Path. Here it is. Critical Path. Buckminster Fuller's book that was published in 1981, 2 years before he died. And it was to change my view on Bucky immeasurably. In the part that I read, Bucky Fuller talked about his making predictions. And this is what he said. He said that he made very sure that his predictions were 50 years in the future. Why? He said he made sure that his predictions were that far out in the future so as not to draw the attention of the established power elites that he was a threat to the world that they were maintaining and furthering. Now, my background was not in economics. I had made a reputation in economics because of my paper and because what I predicted was going to happen. And by the time the 2008 PDN ran around, I was published on websites around the world, gold and silver financial websites around the world, because of my writings about the crisis that I had predicted and was then in motion. My background, I had never taken a degree in economics in my life. All right? The reason why I had made a reputation was in 1991, I had heard these extraordinary words when I was at the extraordinary words that said this. In times of expansion, it is to the prize the hare goes. Quick, risk-taking, and bold, his is the best bet. In times of contraction, however, the tortoise is favored. Quick only to retract his vulnerable head and neck, the slow and sure is the preferable bet to the quick and easy. There comes a time, however, when neither the hare nor the tortoise is victor. This is the time of the vulture. And the vulture feeds neither upon the stored-up wealth of the bear or the passions of the bull, which lie buried beneath the rubble of economic collapse. The vulture instead feeds upon the blind denial and ignorance of the ostrich. I heard those words in 1991, which set me off on a period of intense study of economics, money, gold, and silver. And so by the time the meeting of the Positive Need Network, where I made my prediction in 2007, I had long believed and foreseen that we were headed for a cataclysm of epic proportions. One and a half years later, in October, in 2008, that crisis happened. September and October 2008, Wall Street banks fell, markets collapsed. And there I was, reading Bucky Fuller's book, Critical Path. And I was astounded by what he said. Bucky's introduction to Critical Path was titled Collapse of the World's Power Structures. What he said was, the world's power structures, economic, political, and religious, were going to collapse. And out of that collapse, perhaps would come a far better world. It wasn't certain, but what was certain was the collapse was going to happen, the crisis was going to happen, and what was at stake and unknown at that time was the response of humanity to the crisis it was undergoing. So in 2008, I began reading Bucky's book because it coincided with much of what I believed was going on, that humanity was entering a crisis. I just didn't know Bucky's focus on this idea. Now, I want you to see this. All right? There's a lot of notes that I've taken on this book. All right? I read Bucky over and over and over again. And what I want to tell you is, of all the points of view, of all the frames of the crisis that we're going through, I believe Bucky had it down better than most. All right? And what he said was that this crisis was universally intended to transform humanity. So for those of us who are here in 2020, participants, either observers, we're soon going to be participants in the crisis that's happening. The crisis is institutional, and it's going to transform humanity, or we are going to perish in the process. Bucky said humanity's future was not in the box, that humanity's future was going to be determined by humanity's reaction to the crisis that was going to be upon us. So here in 2020, what I want to say is, what I predicted, 12 years ago, 13 years ago now, wow, that's something. At the Positive TV Network, we're in the middle of, and it's going to get worse. It's going to become more intense. That the political institutions and the disarray that we see happening in our government, in the UK, in Europe, in China, in India, in fact, Brazil, all over the world, is going to become more intense. The political structure is collapsing, and so too is the economic structure. Credit and debt, what we call capitalism, is an uneasy relationship between credit and debt. And now the levels of debt have reached such extraordinary heights that no amount of cheap credit can induce the requisite amount of growth needed to pay the interest on that debt. That whole house of cards that we've enjoyed, not equally, over the last 300 years is going to come crashing down. And I have no idea what it's going to look like. But I do know it is going to be catastrophic. And the third elite that's going to collapse is the elite of the religious systems on the earth. Bucky said the elite, the collapse of the power structures, religious, economic, and political, is at hand. And he wrote this book in 1981, and it is happening. Now, it's stunning. I didn't know that Bucky was this aware at that level. I had sort of written him off as an optimist who saw there was enough for everyone, and that he was. And he was a man of peace. He saw the Earth as, he called it the spaceship Earth, on which all of us were a part of. I had not become aware of this other part of Bucky where he foresaw this incredible crisis. Marshall then asked me if I had ever read Grunts of Giants. And of course, I said no. And Marshall said, I got to get you a copy. So this was probably 10 years ago, and I went up the web, and it was out of print. The only remaining copies were over $200, and Marshall said, listen, you got to read this book. I'm going to send you my copy. Bucky had given him a signed copy of the manuscript of Grunts of Giants before it came out. I said, don't send me that copy. It's far too important. Marshall then found me a copy of Grunts of Giants on the website of Bucky Fuller Institute, which had not, now you can go on the web and you can find it. Here it is. It's a Grunts of Giants. All right? Like Critical Path, you can see I've read it. Grunts of Giants was published after Bucky died, the year that he died. And there was a reason for this. Bucky knew the strength and the power and the influence of the prevailing elites, and he did not want to be seen as a threat to them, or he knew they would go to great lengths to make sure what he said was not heard. So the book was published after he died, and let me assure you, Grunts of Giants lays out the effect of corporations on the economic well-being of the United States and the globe itself. And what Bucky said was, multinational corporations have drained the wealth and taken it away and sequestered it for their own use and have left countries and the citizens that produce the wealth impoverished. Now, if you're not part of the 3%, you know what I'm talking about. And if you are in the 10% that is employed by the 3%, you're still well off. But the truth is, the 80%, the 85%, in fact, the 90% that is not at the top is on the verge of economic extinction. This is going to trigger the crisis that has come to a head in 2020. Now, Bucky did not leave us all in the lurch. I want to talk about something very interesting that he did. The guy was a total genius. He was a futurist. In 1979, he was talking with Marshall, and they built a molecule of an atom. They built a molecule, a model of a molecule that Bucky said had to exist. He said this hasn't been discovered yet. He told Marshall this is a carbon molecule. The structure, a combination of 60 carbon molecules, had not yet been discovered. And he told Marshall this molecule C60, as it is known today, has to exist because the structure is the strongest and lightest molecule in existence. And he told Marshall, someday it would be used in medicine. Well, this story continues like this. 2 years ago, Marshall received a bottle of C60. He didn't know it was being produced. All right. This molecule that Bucky predicted was discovered by scientists in 1985. They won the Nobel Prize for it 11 years later, and it had begun being researched on since that time. 2 years ago, somebody sent Marshall a bottle of this C60. Marshall had no idea what it did, and this friend told Marshall that maybe this is a gift from Bucky, from out of the past. Marshall took a dose of this C60, and the next morning he woke up, and he knew something was radically different. And as Marshall lay there, he said he realized he was no longer in pain. That the C60 he had taken the night before had ended the 2 years of intense pain, constant pain that he'd been in from two knee replacement surgeries 2 years before. So he called up Martha, my wife, because Martha, he'd been at her house at Thanksgiving, and she was using a cane, and she was waiting for a hip replacement. Marshall told her what had happened to him. He sent her a bottle of that same C60. Martha took it. The next day, her pain went away. Well, we had a friend of ours, a very close friend of mine, who knew Marshall he knew Marshall. And in a casual conversation, he asked what was going on with Marshall. So I told my friend Jeff about the C60 and that the pain had gone away. Well, Jeff, my friend, said, Darryl, he said, when I was a kid, I had this congenital hip problem with my bones, And they cured it, but they told my wife, my mother, that this pain was going to come back when I was older. He said, it's back. So I told him about the C60. Jeff sent away, took it, the bottle was gone. The pain was gone. Well, what was curious was that Marshall had this bottle of C60 tested. And he wanted to find out really what else was in it. And the testing laboratory said, there's only trace elements of C60 in what you've sent us. All right? Buy the real stuff from Sigma Aldrich, one of the major chemical companies that he recommended, or SES, which had produced the C60 for the laboratory used in the body rat study for the researchers, which put it on the map because the C60 that they gave to the rats made the rats live 90% longer instead of killing them as they were looking to do. If you want to find this out, this is all up on the web today. I mean, it's amazing what happens when you Google C60. 2.5 years ago when we first ran across it, there was much little up there. So what happened is that Marshall and Martha started taking the recommended SES produced C60, and their pain came back. This was stunning. I mean, everybody was taking C60 because of the body rat study, because it made the rats live 90% longer. That was the interest in it. And we assumed that the SES product, which was cheaper than the product we got, was better because the lab told us, the chemist told us that there was far more C60 in the SES product than in the bottle that we'd been getting, all right, which was in sunflower oil, not olive oil, all right. But we had that stuff tested. I mean, we sent this to laboratories. We had the molecules. We had the sizes. We were really into this because Marshall wanted to find out why the C60 worked and why the first product that he got worked with pain and the other product didn't. And the conclusion we came to was it wasn't the amount of C60 that was critical in whether it was effective to us. It was the size of the clusters. That the more the C60 clustered, the less effective it was. And the conclusion we came to was a product that Marshall, Martha, and Jeff took was effective because there was so little C60 in it that they didn't cluster together as they did in the other product. The other products was based upon the formulation from used in the body rat study. They were trying to stuff as many molecules of C60 into it to kill the rats. Well, what they found out was, or what we assumed was, the larger molecules were eliminated from the body in the first 72 hours. The smaller molecules stayed in the body and were responsible for the extraordinary antioxidant effect it had on the human body, and that's why the rats given the C60 lived 90% longer. Well, what happened is, this was a gift from Bucky. A year ago, our team one of the members came to us, and he'd been taking C60 for 6 months on his own. He was a former vice president of Grupo Bimbo, the largest bakery company in the world. And not only that, he was a chemist. And when he came into our little group, we told him what the experiments we had been doing. I sent him the analysis of the C60 molecules from all these different manufacturers. I told him that Marshall and Martha and Jeff had taken this brand of C60 that was in a minority, but it was far more effective than the C60 other people were taking. And we told him that we thought it had to do with the molecular size, the size of the clusters, not the molecule. Molecules is standard size. But in its natural state, C60 clusters and clumps together. So he remembered an experiment he had done 30 years before. And what happened is that we tried it broke up the clusters, and now what has happened in the last 2 months is that if you go to my website, www.drschoon.com, there's a little thing about C60. And if you follow that, you'll find out the research we have done and why bioactive C60 is so much more powerful than the other C60 out there. So I've gotten sort of off topic, but I'm not off topic, because the year 220 is going to be a year of intense events, politically, economically, and the collapse of our institutional structures. The world that we see and have known for the past 40, 50 years is disappearing. It's going to be wiped away. That's my belief. My belief is that the weather patterns are going to become far more intense. That the weather that we're seeing, the fires that we're seeing in Australia, Southern Europe, California, and around the world are going to become considerably more critical. That all the other weather patterns, earthquakes, earth changes, are going to become even more consequential. So we are going to see a total shift in the world that we feel to be true. But I think there's a purpose to it. And my belief is this, that the purpose of this crisis, which is what Bucky explained in Critical Path, was set upon us by the universe, forcing humanity to become aware of the life that we share with each other at a level we never have. And that it is only by a crisis beyond and without precedent, as Bucky put it, that is going to make this transpire. And I think Bucky's gift to us of the C60 molecule was not that we were headed for its destruction, but a great promise lay in front of us, which he said was a world with a higher standard of living than we've ever had before. A world where there was more for each one of us than we've ever had before. But it was a world that was going to come at the expense of the world that we knew to be true. That it was going to come at a crisis that was going to force us to look at our fellow man and each other differently than we have ever had before. That it was going to force us to look at our existing power structures, economic, political, and religious, in a way we never saw before. And so this is what I believe is going to happen to us in 220. I assume that throughout the year I will be giving other interviews and other talks, and we'll track this together. This is only January, but I believe it's going to be a year of intense consequence. And in April, I'm going to be speaking in London with Sandy Japley, David Morgan, and others about what is going to transpire. The focus of the talk is going to be economic, money. The title of the event is Money, Paper, Rock, Scissors. You can find about this event by going to my website, www.drschoon.com. It's there. The details are there, just like the details about the C60. And to those of you who are watching, my fellow brothers and sisters on this planet, I wish you the best of luck in this year, because it's going to be a year, I believe, of intense and multiplying crises, but I also believe it's going to be a year of intense opportunity. And if you stay true to what you're feeling in your heart, you're going to find yourself at a much higher level than you are today. That is my hope for you. It is my hope for myself. Good luck. Darryl Robert Schoon.